on December 20, 1966. In the Veterans Hospital in Neuenberg, Germany, Albert Gunther Goring passed away mostly unnoticed by the world at large. Buried along with him is the gratitude of many who owed their lives to him during the Second World War. Albert Gunther Goring was born to Heinrich Ernst Goring and his second wife, Franziska Tiefenbrunn, on March 9, 1895. Heinrich Goring was the first Governor-General to German South Africa and Consul General to Haiti. The family lived with their children's godfather, Hermann Espenstein Ritter von Modernberg, an aristocrat and a prominent physician of Jewish descent, at Veldenstein and Moderndorf castles. Albert was one of 5 children, with his brothers, Hermann and Karl Ernst Goring, and his 2 half-sisters, Olga and Paula, from Heinrich's previous marriage. Heinrich's duties required him to often be away from home, and in his absence, Espenstein treated the children as their surrogate father. During the First World War, Hermann flew with the war ace, Baron Manfred von Richthofen, leader of the Flying Circus Squadron. After von Richthofen died in battle, he became the commander and an ace and war hero himself. Albert served as a communication engineer in the trenches and was wounded several times repairing communication wires and equipment. After the war, Hermann turned to politics and joined the Nazi Party. Albert found the party to be repugnant, and his anti-Nazi sentiment caused a rift between the 2 brothers. After the war, Albert studied engineering, and in the 1920s, he was employed by the paint and dye company, I.G. Farben and Junkers, a manufacturer of heating elements and boilers. During the 1930s, while in Austria, he worked in the film industry for his friend Oskar Pilzer, owner of the largest film company in Austria. Albert didn't hesitate to express his feelings about the brutal treatment of the Jews and dissidents throughout Germany. He had nothing good to say about the Nazi Party or his brother's involvement with Hitler, and he renounced his German affiliation by becoming an Austrian citizen. But strangely enough, despite their political differences, they remained close as brothers. While managing the studio, the Jewish husband of Germany's film sweetheart, Henny Porten, was now unacceptable to the Nazi Party. But Henny had a close personal friend, Emma, the wife of Hermann Goring. Goring turned to his brother, Albert, for help. Albert gave him a film contract, as a favor to Hermann, and a role in the film, The Comedian. Albert would have Hermann return the favor time after time in the future. In 1938, everything changed. Germany forced Austria to vote on a referendum to annex Austria into Germany. As the Austrians went to the polls, the local Nazis made sure that the outcome was in their favor. Hitler rode through Vienna in triumph, and the persecutions against the Jews and dissidents began. Albert, with full knowledge of the power of the Goring name, began to call in the favors from Hermann. The Austrian Chancellor, Kurt Schuschnigg, was arrested and imprisoned following the German annexation. Albert called his brother, asking him if this was the best way to treat a former head of state, and asked for his release. Due to his wealth and influence, Albert helped other Jews escape the Nazi terror. His employer, Oskar Pilzer, was taken forcefully from his home, arrested, and sent to a concentration camp. Albert again turned to Hermann to help him find which camp Pilzer had been sent to, and to arrange for his release. He then aided Pilzer and his family to escape Austria, eventually finding safety in America. While Hermann's rise to power continued with Hitler as his deputy Führer, Albert increased his anti-Nazi activities. He committed open acts of defiance against the Nazis. One example of this was when Albert, one day in Vienna, came upon a group of old Jewish women forced to scrub the street on their hands and knees, overseen by their Nazi oppressors as a crowd jeered. Albert pushed his way through to join the women cleaning, on his own hands and knees. When they started to arrest him, they discovered who he was and released him. He continued to aid artists, political dissidents, and other Jews to escape using his privilege as the brother of the deputy Führer. On March 15, 1939, Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia, placing hundreds of thousands of Czech Jews in peril. With the occupation in place, the crackdown began in earnest. The Jews were brutally harassed and rounded up to be sent to concentration camps. Albert was appointed, because of his managerial skills, by the directors of the Škoda Works, a major arms manufacturer, as the export director of the Škoda Works in Pisen, Czechoslovakia. Albert seized the opportunity to further his anti-Nazi activities. He had made contacts with the Czech resistance, encouraging minor acts of sabotage. He also forged his brother's signature on transit documents, enabling dissidents to flee. He sent trucks to concentration camps demanding laborers, then having them driving into the woods to be released. He continued his defiance throughout the occupied countries. In Poland, during the summer of 1944, the walls began to close in around him. The Gestapo in Prague had been monitoring and recording his actions. In August, a wire was sent to Heinrich Himmler by the General of Police in Prague. Gruppen leader Karl Frank requested permission for Albert's arrest and to bring him to Berlin for interrogation concerning his activities with unreliable Czech industrialists and the serious suspicions of his traitorous activities. The situation forced Hermann to ask Himmler personally to smooth over the matter, and in October Albert was cleared of all charges. By this time Germany was faced with losing the war. After the success of the Allied invasion of Normandy, in June of 1944, the Allies pushed through France and eastward into Germany in April of 1945. The Russians, coming from the west, fought their way into Berlin on the 20th. And took control of the city on May 2, 1945. The war finally came to an end on May 8, when General Alfred Jodl, Hitler's chief of staff, signed the formal surrender. The Allies agreed to conduct the International Military Tribunal, better known as the Nuremberg Trials, to judge and punish the defeated surviving members of Nazi Germany. The tribunal commenced on November 20, 1945, and lasted until October 1, 1946. Albert was interrogated, along with the other defendants. At first the Allies did not believe his story. But Albert managed to produce a list of 34 names of people he had aided during the war, and many of those came forth to testify in his defense. He was released by the Allies, only to be arrested by the Czechs. After learning of the extent of his activities, he was released again. He returned to Germany, but he was mostly shunned, due to his last name. During his lifetime, Albert was known as quite a ladies' man. He had married 4 times. And during the war, he divorced his second wife to marry Mila Klazarova, with whom they had a daughter, Elizabeth. Due to his continued infidelities, Mila divorced him, and then migrated to Lima, Peru with their daughter. In his last years he lived in a simple flat in Munich. But before his death, in 1966, he married his housekeeper Brunhilde Seewald-Statter in gratitude, so she could receive his pension after his death. His records were hidden from the public, until the 1990s, when they were declassified. Until then, his contributions for fighting against the Nazi regime were mostly unknown. But to the relatives of those he helped escape the Nazis, he will be remembered as the savior of their families.
Albert Goring was informed, and due to his name, he exerted all influence, and I am underlining all influence, to find where they kept my father, and to obtain his immediate release. And this I owe to Albert Goring. Our family owes to Albert Goring.